Hey guys, I'm working on Hexpunk a lot right now, and I really want to show you so much of the current world building, the lore, all the ideas I have for rules and game mechanics, etc. But for that, to sort myself, my ideas and thoughts, I need space. Welcome to my workshop. This behind me is just a door and a wall right now, and I want to turn it into a pinboard to collect and organize all the ideas that float around in this weird head of mine. Hexpunk will be the first project for this to use, but I also want it to be a place to organize and collect ideas and tasks for big projects that I'm doing in general. So I have this old pinboard that will be the centerpiece for the door itself, and then I just bought a bunch of corkboard at the local hardware store, and now we're gonna throw all of those onto this wall, and then we'll continue. Okay, we have a pinboard wall, and now we can start working. So, I want to tell you about my ideas for the magic system. However, one thing before we start talking about magic, if you haven't figured out by my accent, I'm German. My first language is German, and other than the majority of my projects, I'm writing Hexpunk in German for the largest part currently. Both the world as well as the rulebook. Since the friends that I'll most possibly be playtesting the game with are mostly native German speakers as well, and that just makes it a lot easier for us to play and for me to write. And I was also excited by the idea of trying to do some world building in German, or at least create a world that sounds and feels like it's inhabited by people that speak a German language. That was the idea. I just kind of liked it for some reason. But of course, I'll make sure that you understand everything that's going on at all times. And I'm not saying Hexpunk won't be available in English at some miraculous point, but just not thinking that far ahead at this point. So now that that's said, let's talk about Hex. Okay. A few weeks have passed, during which I've gathered a lot of work for the magic system, and I can't wait to finally show you what I've got so far. But first things first. What do I not like about other magic systems in role-playing games? Most of the time, they're boring. You have a set of spells that you learned and that you leveled, and you can learn new ones, but usually you just have this fixed list with spells that you already learned, and you just roll on them to see if they worked out, and then you get magically drained of mana, and that's about it. Miscasts can be a fun mechanic once in a while, but that's about it. Or it's the polar opposite. Crafting and casting a spell is so complicated that I, as a new player, am overwhelmed. Like, I have to study a whole library to understand the system, which are the ones that I usually kept my distance from. And then there's Call of Cthulhu, which I deeply love, but the magic system in my eyes doesn't even count as one, because yeah, you just have like a chapter full of pre-made spells, and it's weirdly hard to learn them, and then you just perform them and they work, and you get magically drained of mana as well. So yeah, that's not quite the way I like it. Talking about mana, that's another thing that bothers me, which I already mentioned in my introduction video. You always have a resource which in most TTRPGs and video games merely acts as a kind of currency without much effect on gameplay actually. More often than not, running out of mana or magic points or whatever just keeps you from using more magic, like running out of money and not being able to buy more equipment. Which is a possibility to regulate players' ability to cast spells and use magic, but a rather boring one if you ask me. So that has to change as well. The best magic system that I've seen and played so far is Ars Magica. I've never actually played the game itself, but a few years ago I made a fun homebrew version with two friends where we combined How to Be a Hero with the magic system of Ars Magica. And that was ridiculous and fantastic. And yeah, our character sheets looked something like this. So this is the How to Be a Hero part, and this little piece here is the fantastic magic system of Ars Magica. And you can see this game works with a set of magical techniques and elements which you can level independently and then combine one technique with one element to create a spell. It's dynamic spell crafting rather than casting, and that fits my ideas much more. So what do I want then? Coming up with the initial idea for Hexpunk, I imagined a free, creative, elaborate spell crafting system, which more often than not works in the form of rituals for acute, direct magic acts, and in preparation and creation of spells and storing them in magic items like potions, scrolls or similar, to later on spontaneously use. You know, I pictured witches drawing pentagrams in the sand and lighting bonfires on a shore to perform powerful curses. I pictured wizards searching old tomes for the perfect ingredient for a special powerful magical artifact. And I pictured fighters and investigators entering a scene equipped with enchanted bullets and magnifiers. And I pictured cruel, power-hungry mutant warlocks entering a battlefield surrounded by human sacrifices of whose life power they feast to conjure up devastating forces from earth, sky and sea. And I imagined players utilizing this magic system to come up with the most creative and diverse spells and magic arts, all of which in an interesting, fun game experience. All of this should be possible with Hexpunk. So how do we do this then? The basic idea of the Ars Magica system, combining a set of techniques and targets, seems like the smartest way to create a solid foundation for a creative spell inventing system. So I'll keep this basic idea, tweak it a little bit to make it more fit to my lore and game mechanic ideas, and build on top of it. For example, including the possibility to combine as many elements and techniques as you want to create more elaborate or intricate spells and more specialized and more powerful magic items, etc. Next thing, getting rid of a currency like mana as a magic use limit. If it doesn't do more than just stop the players from casting spells and using magic items, it's not interesting for me. I don't want my players to by spells. But of course, we need some kind of limitation, or rather motivation to rethink if a player wants to use magic in a game situation. And in the early stages of brainstorming for Hexpunk, I got the idea that danger, that risk of practicing magic, is an interesting, attractive limitation, because it can be just as dynamic and as creative as the spell itself. This will keep players from running around the world and solving every little problem with magic, because that would be way too powerful and way too boring to play. So they know whenever they use magic, miscasts can happen, will most possibly happen, and miscasts will be bad. These two things, a formula of targets and techniques, and danger as an inhibition mechanic, are the basis of the Hexpunk magic system. I gotta give you a little lore dump now, so you can understand the following ideas better. So the source of magic in Hexpunk is a strange, otherworldly force, not quite part of our world, but more of a radiance, echo or shadow of another one that seeps and flows into ours everywhere. The inhabitants of this world call it the Interisk, which in this fantasy language I'm making up means something like the in-between or the interwoven thing, because it's basically tangled up in every part of the real natural world. Most of the time it's dormant and doesn't really affect reality much, but under certain circumstances, usually phenomena or conditions in this world that remind the Interisk of its home world, it will wake up. And this is when magic happens. Reality gets distorted, oftentimes in horrendous and dangerous ways. Because once the Interisk is set in motion, it cannot be stopped. Something will happen. This is our factor of risk, of danger. Mages and witches now, however, have found a way to conjure these reality-bending effects on purpose, to control the flow of the Interisk. This now is where the formula comes in. Learning the formula, meaning gaining experience either through theoretical study or through practice, will make you more able to concentrate your will to influence certain targets in certain ways. This helps lower the risk of magic acts going wrong, but oftentimes that's not all. So let's go into the details of my magic system, starting with the formula, and then I'll introduce you to two other components of using magic in Hexpunk, which are risk factors and catalysts. So about the formula, I'll keep the basic idea from Ars Magica, but make it fit for my vision of the world and to the lore that I came up with, because in this world the Interisk works a bit differently than magic in other games. By utilizing Interisk, mages and sorcerers can only force effects that would naturally occur when Interisk is set in motion by accident. I want it all to sound a bit sciencey and technical, thus I've chosen the name Verfahren or procedures for my magical techniques, and reduced them to 4, which describe the 4 ways that the state of reality can be influenced. First we have the easiest one, which is Verformung in German, which is best translated to mutation or distortion, which lets you manipulate the shape and nature of your target. The second one is Bewegung, which is movement or transport, which lets you accelerate or even teleport targets completely regardless of time and space. Then we have Schöpfung, which is increasing and creating. So you can, for example, conjure up matter from absolute nothing, or increase something that is already there. And then we have the opposite, Verringerung, which is reduction or even annihilation. So you can decrease matter that is already there, or you can completely obliterate it and make it become nothing. Then we have my 8 targets, which in this case are called subjects, which are divided into 6 states or kinds of matter and 2 additional tool subjects. These tool subjects are temperature, pretty self-explanatory, and Eindruck, which is maybe best described with impression, which lets you alter or create an impression of something. So you can muffle the sound of walking, or you can create an illusion, or even render someone invisible. That's the idea of Eindruck. Then we have the meta subjects, which start with Spannung, which is potential, I think is the English word, which can be electrical charges or magnetic fields or something like that. So like the tension between matter. And then we have gases, which is self-explanatory, I think. We have fluids, same for that. And then, of course, we have solid matter, which I've divided into living things and dead things, because in the lore of Hexpunk that makes a difference. I'll tell you more about that when I talk about magic lore, but that's a different topic. And last but not least, we have liminales, which is more of a vague thing, liminal matter, which is in some kind of in-between state, like a transitory state. This is also more important for magic lore, because the interrisk itself is some kind of transitory state, something in between, and thus it is naturally drawn to things that also have a state like this. So this could be like an egg with a fetus in it that's not already hatched. It could be a drying, wilting flower. It could be wet sand on a shore, or a carcass of something that is rotting, or something that is dying in this very moment. Those are the things that the interrisk is especially drawn to. Something else that is important to note is that in my idea, the interrisk, since it's not complete part of the natural world but only influences it, all performable spells completely ignore all the common laws of physics. Which means the physically impossible is possible in Hexpunk. So this here is the basic toolbox that you will always need for casting a spell in Hexpunk. A spell is always made up of at least one procedure and one subject. Learning the formula, meaning investing skill points into the subjects and procedures that you're interested in, reflects your experience in the magic arts. A great idea from the game Savage Worlds: the more skill points you invest in the formula, the better dice or more dice you get for your magic roll. But more on that later. Also, the total sum of skill points you've invested into the formula reflects how prone to interrisk you are, which in game is called the interrisk affinity, which is a game mechanic that will be pretty important in game, but also more on that later. Next up, risk factors. As I said, the interrisk, if woken up and set in motion, will always try to find its own way, and that's what makes magic in this world so dangerous. There's always the chance that a spell goes wrong and produces a miscast. There are certain factors, elements of a spell or world circumstances that raise the chance of the interrisk searching its own way rather than following the intentions of the magician. General rule is the more complicated and intricate the goal of a spell is, the higher is the chance of the interrisk not cooperating. I made a little list with factors that should be considered before rolling the spell, and each factor comes with its own value in risk points. The total sum of risk points is the value against which you roll with your dice to cast the spell. Since risk points add up and you get dice with higher numbers or more dice for your roll, that naturally means that to succeed, the value of the roll has to be higher than the value of the spell difficulty. So now we have the game mechanic that sets the difficulty for a roll, and the game mechanic that gives you the dice to roll at all. But oftentimes a player or character will notice that their abilities are not good enough to minimize the risk of using magic. To further secure a spell, to be able to direct the flow of interrisk in the desired way, magicians can utilize catalysts, or Pholisten as they're called in game. Catalysts are exactly that. Tools to include in a ritual or spell that have natural or artificial inter-risk affinity, which means the inter-risk is drawn to these things and more prone to work in the intended way. I have yet to decide if catalysts become useless after including them in a spell, rather rendering them consumables, but that's for future thoughts. Catalysts can be of varying nature, either materials or objects that are interesting for the inter-risk, or they could be shapes and patterns, symbols like runes or hieroglyphs, or ritual dances and gestures, or of course a verbally uttered magic spell, an incantation. In the end, this means that very skilled magicians who have studied and practiced their art for years or decades might be able to perform a magic act without moving, without saying a word, simply by thinking really hard about the way they want to alter reality. Completely and solely relying on their skill level, on the points that they've invested in the formula. But normally it's absolutely advisable for all magic users, even skilled magicians, to utilize catalysts in their spells and rituals. Catalysts, just like the parts of the formula, come with a dice value reflecting their quality, their inter-risk affinity. So whenever you decide to use a catalyst, one extra dice per catalyst is added to your roll, increasing the chance to score higher than the difficulty level. In the end, when the player knows the difficulty of the spell, they will have a hand full of dice to roll, which is an image I had in my mind thinking about the game from the very beginning. I just love the idea that in the game situation it really feels like you've gathered all your materials, like your dried herbs and your bone runes and whatever in your hand, and now you're ready for the spell, and you just throw them on the table and set the magic in motion. And then it takes a few seconds, a little bit of tension maybe building up until you know if all the preparation work was worth it and if your spell succeeds, or if it was all in vain and the inter-risk finds another way to flow and instead weird or terrible things happen. So, to sum up how a spell works. You decide what the goal of your magic act is. You decide what parts of the formula, what procedures and what subjects to use for it. You check the risk factors to find out what the individual difficulty of your spell is. You either decide to go for the experience, for the skill roll only, or you decide to add catalysts to increase your chance of success and get more dice for the roll. You roll, and you find out if your cast was successful and the desired effect occurs, or if your cast failed and something out of your control happens. Now you might say, this sounds really effortful, which yeah, that's true. My idea was to create a spell crafting system that allows freedom and creativity, but takes a while to execute. So you're rather performing rituals than casting spontaneous spells, even though for experienced characters this will be a possibility, this will work as well. But there is another mechanic that will allow you to prepare spells, binding them into a vessel, for example a potion, scroll, a wand or a crystal or something. And these things in Hexpunk are called Vexalte, meaning placeholder, so you can perform the spell in a safe environment with as many catalysts as you need, increasing the chance of success, and then store the effect of this spell inside the Vexalte. You can then collect and trade these, or of course you can take your prepared Vexaltes on quests and travel with you. Once you decide to use them, they will certainly work, because the effect is already in motion. Since you've prepared the spell at another point in time, they're just stored temporarily until you decide to set them free. So this is the best and safest option to cast spells in a spontaneous situation. This also allows the creation of talismans, invisibility cloaks, enchanted weapons, magical armor, etc. All of these would be classified as Vexaltes too. They store a spell that has already been cast until it is used. So far, this is the system, talking game mechanics. There's a whole lot of lore about magic going on already, like why is the interest drawn to certain things, what kind of things act as protection against magical influences and why, and where does the magic come from in the first place and why is it in our world. But I think I'll tell you more about that once I do a world building talk. So this was an attempt of introducing you to my idea for a slightly new and fun and creative magic system. I hope you could even remotely understand what I'm aiming for, and if there are open questions left about how things work, feel free to ask them in the comments. I'll try and answer them, or at least come up with an answer if there isn't one already. Yeah, this whole project, just like the Interrisk, is set in motion now and it will not stop. So make sure to subscribe and activate the notifications so you don't miss the next update on Project Hexpunk. So thank you all for watching and see you next time.